Alright guys, welcome back. Hope you all had a good weekend. My goal is to make this video a bit more concise and focused on what could be actionable this week. But as always, we're looking at weekly charts. Some things could take a little bit of time to play out. Once the week gets started, we can kind of get a better feel from the daily charts and kind of go from there. But for first order of business here, I'd like to discuss Friday after the close, the TLT, your 20-year Treasury bond ETF, had its largest trade since inception here, a cluster trade of $4.48 billion. So not the largest single print, but cluster of trades together. This is going to be a very, very big level going forward. On top of that, the IEF, your 7 to 10 year Treasury bond, also got its largest cluster trade on record. And then the TYO, the 3 times bear of that, had its second largest cluster trade and third largest cluster trade this week. So a lot of positioning here in treasuries. As we know, we've been talking about kind of the 10-year yield, the 30-year yield, and then breaking out and being at big important areas. So this is a very interesting turn of events here. This would kind of hint, coming in here at the top on the bear treasury ETF, that possibly this is a top, which would be bullish for TLT and the IEF. So we will see as we come into CPI and PPI this week. I think these are some very interesting prints to keep in mind, and we will talk about some rate sensitive stuff as well this week. So definitely want to keep an eye on the TLT. It has been at yearly lows down here. I mean, down here from 2023 into the end of that bear market we had. So some interesting positioning there to kind of, quickly look through, the overall market. Don't want to spend too much time here because there's not too much to say. Big flag break on SPY this week, right? We had the big hammer candle last week, and we got the follow through and close into all-time highs on it. Really not much more to go over than that. As long as that holds like it is a big breakout. No need to overthink it. QQQ lagging a little bit, but trying to play some catch up. I mentioned they were gonna, get back in sync a little bit closer here, and Q so far is the one trying to play catch up here. So QQQ, if you draw a downtrend, definitely broke the downtrend and is coming back up into the top of this range. Similar look on SMH. We are getting a big pop back out of that retracement. Definitely has the most work to do. But the semi washout has kind of cooled down, and we are starting to see some setups form within these sectors. So with that being said, we'll kind of start to go through here and look at a few things that I have on radar this week. Obviously, the breakout in metals this week was one of the biggest things I think that occurred. GDX is the strongest. If we're looking across sectors, it's stronger than GLD, SLV. So the gold miners are kind of what I have my focus on. Obviously, this is a very, very big weekly candle to kind of work off of here. So, does it go straight up? Maybe. But do we get a little consolidation? If we do and start to have these moving averages catch up, I think, to keep your life simple, you could just play the GDX if you want to. I posted some single names to look through. I think the single names, if you get it right, may outperform a little bit. But if you want to keep it simple, I think GDX is the strongest looking metal theme so far out of gold and silver, and where I would be focusing in for some type of entry here. And, these gap up pretty significantly. They gap up and down. So quite a range here, and we now have 2 breakaway bull structures now. This is a big change in character. 1, 2. So we will see, maybe it back and fills some of this one right here through the 200-day. Maybe it gets a little back test, but GDX definitely on radar to try and find some positioning in that with a little bit more time. This is a big breakout occurring here. FCX also, copper is looking pretty good here. Back to the top of this flag, I think we had some 85 calls with a couple $1 million thrown at it on this. Again, right back to the top of this resistance range, has failed this 70 area quite a few times. Would love for this to set up a little bit longer, an inside day or something, or a little bit of pullback to this mid 60 area to try and get some longer term positioning. But copper, big part of the AI trade build out there, and I think, could be a little clue with this breakout here. ERO, big downtrend break on this one as well. So some really good looks here in the metals. GDX, copper would kind of be my focus, but you have a lot of healthy looks across like steel, aluminum names. AA kind of caught my eye into the end of the day Friday, I think it was. You got that failed to candle the last week and the follow through right up into that weekly 8 EMA. This is a big retest area for AA, in my opinion, kind of like that weekly base it broke out of, returning to the scene of the crime here. 618 retracement and getting the candle out of it. I still think this is a pretty good broadening formation. So don't lose sight of aluminum either. I think this AA chart is pretty healthy looking here. But just metals in general, I think have finished their consolidation, their corrective waves, and are potentially firing off here for the next wave higher. So we'll be eyeing any kind of constructive consolidation or dips back into those areas. ARCG, we talked about this in depth on the breakout back in May. Continues to kind of outperform here with the XBI. The biotech sector has been doing very, very well, and ARCG also doing well here. Holding NTRA had a really big earnings reaction this week, and that helped out a lot. But just kind of wanted to talk about a few names on this. They're all in the journal room. But I think ABSI is probably one of the better looking names here as far as it has like breakaway momentum, retrace zone and pop back up. I think this looks good. Anything in this like mid 7 to 8 area, I think is going to be a good snag on it if it gets any kind of pullback here. But worth mentioning Beam at long-term trend support and VWAP from the lows. Very good risk here against 25. Obviously one of the weaker names, but kind of got stuffed up here, that IPO VWAP. I think this isn't a bad shot off these recent lows here if you're looking for some names lagging in this prime PRME at a retracement zone here. Just kind of taking this, I kind of like this look how it's taking this back out, like these lows here, and trying to reclaim it. So back over that, I think it looks pretty good on these. But again, these are the weaker ones. If RG were to pull back off that IPO VWAP, it would, these are probably the most susceptible, but assuming it continues to trend here, I think RG is definitely one of the winning sectors of the year so far. TAN, our solar ETF, has pulled back to an interesting area. When things run like this, you'd love to see some type of like constructive consolidation here, something with like a flag built out, a pennant, something. Instead, this just went down for like 8 weeks in a row, right? So it's kind of hard to call that constructive, but I think we're back to an area that makes a little bit more sense now. We are back to this kind of inverse fair value gap that should be support now through this 50, 48 to 50 range. Kind of prior highs, where it came up and tested originally and failed. Your anchored VWAP from the lows and your 50 retracement from the lows. So this is starting to see a bit more dark pool accumulation. And I think like some of these names are starting to become more actionable looking. We talked about FSLR last week with that first weekly candle close, and it being an outside bar was pretty powerful off that, long-term trend support there. Got the follow through this week in a big way. This one is, it's a little bit more difficult to trade in my opinion, but so kind of looking through some other names. NXT has been like the leading solar name. Like it did really, really well for 2025, and 2026 has been kind of choppy outside of this big push up, but finally back to a decent area here, I'd say. This like 90-ish area, the 95. Big break of lows, push back up this week. I think, this has it's back into a big resistance spot right here, so it's kind of tricky now. But anything like back within this candle, like a retracement of this candle, I think is worth a shot into like this mid 90 area. if tan has any legs back up. I think NXT is one of the like more fundamentally sound names in my opinion. I don't have that charted. EMPH off that weekly trend support, also a pretty deep retracement, honestly. I mean, the 886 is like the furthest you can go. Retrace nearly this entire move it had, right? When I talk about like tan not being constructive, I mean, this is a perfect picture of it, right? This is really hard to trade, right? If you were caught the breakout and you were holding, hoping this would continue, this just gave up the whole run. So it's not like a constructive like flag setup again or like any kind of corrective wave. It's just a straight back down retracement. So EMPH, NXT, at some interesting areas. Solar Edge I mentioned is just broken looking. There's nothing like constructive I can say about that. But this 30 area is kind of big, and I've been seeing a lot of this. You get these big candle closes lower like this, and then the next week they buy it back up. So, maybe a rising tide lifts all boats and this picks back up, but otherwise it's a little bit broken compared to some of the other ones. And then run is at a pretty big weekly area, in my opinion. You can even see going back to 2018 to 2020, this like $9 to $10 area is pretty supportive for it. Uh, broke the lows here, and now we're back within it. Big outside bar this week off the retracement zone. Obviously has some work to do, but kind of you can make a case for like a two-wave corrective leg lower here, down, up, down. So it has some potential off this area, I think, on the solar stuff. Again, this will also be like rate interest, sensitive, right? The solar sector. So you could make a case for, if those TLT trades are bullish for it, and likewise for the rates to go down. These could be like beneficial sectors. So while I'm also watching solar there, with that being said about rates, go ahead and talk about XHB, your Homebuilders. This has been consolidating for quite a long time now. We've made, I think we're in progress of trying to build higher is the best way I could put it for the XHB. We've held the weekly 200 SMA back in 2025, back in May of this year as well. And we are trying to work back higher. I'll go ahead and draw back like these retracement zones, but there's your 618 and 50 retrace in this area. And again, there's the big weekly candle close lower and back up this week, kind of what I was talking about on Solar Edge there. It definitely has some room to work back out, like finish out this consolidation here. But just something to keep in mind, you have a pretty good base built out here, and rates, if they have topped, big if there, because I feel like there's just so much kind of going on right now. But this is a good place to kind of start looking at names to see what where stuff is and what looks good. Just going through some of the top holdings, there are a few names in the XHB that have been doing really, really well, but we'll refer to, some, that's all-time high. And you can kind of see how we're starting to flip this all-time high VWAP support, resistance, and we're trying to fire back up over it. So definitely a battle being built out here on XHB, but starting to see some clues like in Home Depot. This looks like a pretty clean inverse head and shoulders built out on the weekly with a stronger right shoulder. That's textbook what you want to see against this like weekly 200 SMA. This has been a huge pivot. Just to visualize it for you, you can kind of see where that 200 SMA has been a big pivot point for HD. So the setup is there. Talked about this earlier last week, and we did get a little bit of follow through here, but again, bigger picture move hasn't happened. Home Depot and Lowe's report, not this week, but next. And we have CPI and PPI this week. So if you are leaning on the side of those, prints being bearish for rates, maybe want to grab something with a little time here and kind of front run it. But one thing I forgot to mention about all the dark pool prints is we don't have to have an immediate reaction, right? We don't have to V reversal from here, and we don't have to tank from here, right? We've seen how long it took the IGV dark pool to kind of play out there, and likewise the TLT prints and stuff could take a while to actually see, the true intent behind that. So just keep that in mind. But I feel like with where rates are currently, I think we're going to see a resolve of that in the next 2 to 4 weeks, I would say. So that's why I want to keep these rate interest sensitive names on watch. We have some bases being built out here for sure. And Lowe's is also at a very big pivot area over the last almost 3 years. This kind of looks, they keep taking these lows. And this looks like a failed breakdown to me so far. So a bit of a move back into range for Lowe's. The the anchored VWAP from highs here is up at 231.25, but again, earnings coming in a couple weeks. These are going to move off CPI this week. We always see somebody gambling on Home Depot for CPI. August 21st will catch those earnings reports. If you want to gamble, that's what I would do. I personally maybe buy a little bit more time, and that brings me to BLDR. I think this is at a huge support area. I was just kind of flipping through charts and this one popped up, but I have a volume profile set on from the COVID low, and you can see the point of control is through here. This breakaway anchored VWAP low is here, and then the IPO VWAP, which is huge, very huge for any name. It's been trading any length of time, is down at 60 here. The 707 retrace from the COVID lows is right here as well. So you have a major area here that this volume profile kind of helps visualize. Personally, for me, like this is like you accumulate shares through here as long as it doesn't, get a weekly candle close below here. Even something out to like January or something, I think would be good for this. I can easily see this going back up to test 100 at a minimum, in my opinion, and I don't think that all-time high VWAP is out of the question up at 125 with some time. I'm not talking about like a week or two, but 6 to 12 months from now, I think this is a great like long-term accumulation spot. If we don't, the economy doesn't blow up and go to a recession or something like that, I think this is a decent spot for them. They've had a couple rough earnings, but overall, technically, this is a pretty huge spot here. Yeah, they're not doing great. So, maybe fundamentally it hangs them down, but without that, this is a pretty big spot here. So, moving on, going to talk about some semiconductor stuff and AI trade names to look into for this week, and then I'll kind of wrap it up here. I'm already over what I wanted to do, but just kind of how it goes talking about this. So, CBRS, unfortunately, they have earnings on Wednesday night, but massive base being built out here. This is your first, since the weekly 8 EMA has been built out. This is a pretty good weekly candle close here, in my opinion, right under this IPO VWAP. And if we kind of come down to the daily, I can kind of make my point here. But you can see, there's not really been an advance where we held a retracement zone that was outside of this guy right here. But I mean, this is like the deepest, again, 886 down here is like the deepest retracement, and even, did lower than that. So, new lows, base being built out, 786, 886, all the way back down to the 886. And then this time, so far, the new, like the higher low area is up in this 50 retrace area from this candle. So I'm just using this as a new low impulse, but a bit of a change in character, in my opinion, as this base builds out. It is building higher and into a tighter like flag formation here. As long as this like mid 200 area holds, I'd even say down to like 198, 200. As long as that holds, I think this is very valid to try and move higher here. Earnings are going to be the wild card, unfortunately. I'm not a big earnings player, not a big I don't feel like I'm hanging on to a binary event to make money. So I personally I'm not sure I'll do anything with it. If I did, I would do the CBRG, the 2-time shares, just because they're $5. And I could sell after hours if you need to, after the reaction, and you don't have to, you're not playing with the theta decay, the IV coming out of those contracts, because those things are extremely pricey. They're already they're pricing in a huge move, in my opinion. So CBRS has potential for a re-rating off earnings. Just the vibe I'm getting from it, from the base being built out. The only caveat to that, I would say, is that there has been zero like large trades in this lower area, right? So let's see, 221.30 is the biggest cluster we saw. 350 was the largest single trade, that's way above us. 290 the second, 256. So these are just a little bit smaller in size. I'd like to see some of the bigger trades start to get accumulated through here, but obviously some active prints. I have the largest 50 on. If I go to the largest 10, it changes a bit, right? We haven't seen any activity for the, a little bit through here, through this 221.30 area, 234. So that would be like the first key pivot to break. That's exactly where IPO VWAP is. Again, I would just like to be seeing a little bit more institutional interest here. With the defense and aerospace sector, posted this chart. So this is all equal. They keep this equally weighted all the time. So they'll rebalance and keep it equal weighted, but has been consolidating. Really strong start to the year, right? As soon as 2026 started, impulse up, has been consolidating for the most part now, and we are working back out over this. Boeing is one of the holdings. I really like this compression on Boeing. It has been miserable to trade, and it's just been consolidating. That's why, right? We had this large move up, really deep retrace, and now we have like a much more constructive consolidative wave here to a higher retrace, a higher low. So I think this is energy building, in my opinion. I think Boeing is working up the courage here to try and break. I have this prior high set, but if you just look left, you can kind of see this 240 area just in general. Well, 236 to 240, like that general vicinity, like a break above and fail, break above and fail, break above and fail. So keep in mind this is resistance, but if we start to see this get a little bit of momentum out of here, to me this screams like back to 270 and even up to 300, I think, just based off of Trump holding it, and then just this larger picture. It's been consolidating for, when did it drop into 2020? It's been consolidating 6 years. So at a minimum, I think up to the top of this consolidation range. If it breaks back through here, I think could even do better. But earnings October, yeah, September, October, like 260s, 270s, I think could work here on a break. I would buy some time for this to work out, especially with how it trades. A bit of a failed to Friday, not quite back to the 8-day, but you can notice anytime this has broken back above, like we got a couple holds here of the 8-day and right back down, nothing, nothing, nothing. So if this holds this time and starts to like build out under this 238, 240 against the 8-day, I think that's when you go ahead and try and front run the breakout, and then just risk losing that 8-day. But that would be a very constructive sign compared to what it has been doing. This has been very sloppy. On a weekly, if you zoom out and look at it, it's been, a pretty, textbook corrective wave here into this retracement zone. But to me, Boeing looks pretty actionable going into this week. It maybe won't break this week, but maybe just definitely something to have on radar through here, in my opinion. And I totally went off from CBRS to Boeing. Sorry, I got excited there. Pivot back to semiconductor stuff. So what I saw a lot of on the weekly charts this week were a lot of this, right? A lot of the last week being a 2 down, like we broke down, closed lower, and then a 2 back up. So like a 2 up, a 2 down, 2 up reversal on the weekly. Out of some pretty big pivot and retracement zones. This CEVA happens to be one that looks pretty good in my opinion. Part of the semi trade. We talked about this one when it actually broke out. But these names are starting to work back up, and I think you're going to start to see some leaders emerge out of this. This one in particular looks pretty good. AEHR is, I don't know, that one's a little tricky to me. I know some people like this one. It's definitely been a relative strength one, but it does look good here on the daily. Flagging off the 8-day, earnings are out of the way. This is looking like a pretty strong name. And then it's definitely broke like this lower high downtrend. So AEHR, I think, is one of the ones to keep on watch. Gosh, what's the one we keep seeing flowing out to February? AXTI. So this is part of your optics, right? And that's what I'll talk about in a second on optics here. But really, I mean, this one's tough because it ran from sub $5 to 140, right? So it had a very constructive candle last week off earnings, which is, the catalyst, but outside bar and then 2 up, so 3-2 up. Very big sequence here on this one. I can't buy it up here, and he dips back to trend. I think this is going to start to be one of the leading names. I don't know if anybody remembers, but they were like people writing tons of puts throughout this whole thing. If you go back and look on some of the flow posts, but they were writing puts through this name forever before it started to bounce here. So getting a bounce out of that 200-day and this deep retracement zone on AXTI, which brings me to optics. AXTI is a holding, but Roundhill just did the light LYTE ETF drop. So they're the ones behind DRAM. Sorry, DRAM. All right, and we saw what happened with that one. Now, obviously, optics have already run. They've already had their first leg up, right? Like DRAM was just really good timing. It caught that big, explosive leg higher in memory names. But just something to keep in mind here with this just being freshly printed. We've definitely been seeing a lot of flow in the optics names, I feel like. These are looking a bit stronger than the memory names on this rebound. Light is above its all-time high VWAP. And this downtrend, they do report this week. So personally, this one's way too expensive to do anything with through earnings. But I think just sentiment-wise, if you see this break and go on earnings, there's been flow out to February or March on this one as well. It's been super heavy. CRDO is like adjacent to optics connectivity, but again, another one, kind of a breakout retest look on the weekly, and is already starting to try and lead here against some of the other like AI trade names. In my opinion, this is one of the healthier looks on CRDO, and then this is one that when it gets flow, it's always right. So, or I say that it works initially. So I kind of want to keep this MXL on radar. This is also going to be part of your AI trade, but not back over its all-time high VWAP like some of these other names so far. This downtrend is slightly broken here. Would love to see some flow coming on this one because it can move off that, but to me, this one has some potential here as well. So MXL. So just a few names to kind of keep on watch for more flow and stuff. A lot of them already made nice moves up. It's going to be a matter of finding these when they squat back to their moving averages, or if you get any kind of consolidation here to make these actionable. And then lastly, to go into hardware stuff, everyone is talking about Dell. We know Dell looks good, right? No doubt about it. That was a crazy outside bar on Friday. Does it probably move higher from here? Yes. It's just HPE, same kind of deal. It's breaking out of that base. Absolute menace this week, in my opinion, to if you were trying to trade this, but this wick out down here under 50 and then that, but just look how it's respecting that 8-day. So definitely shaking some people out there. HPQ, we keep seeing put riders on this. Huge break on this, and it's like you try to make sense of why HPQ is running, and your guess is as good as mine, but no doubt this is a strong looking chart. I like this horizontal break back over the weekly 200 SMA. Without a doubt, the strongest weekly candle close, right? If we get follow through this week, every time we've gotten over this level, it's immediate sell down, especially up through here. So this is a big change in character for it. I'm sure we're way back above that, but just kind of lends to the hardware sector, and then Corsair written off for dead, and almost 200% here off the lows. So very big move up. They specialize in like gaming hardware, keyboards, and stuff like that. So that leads me into what is probably one of my top watches into this week. Now this is a bit messy of a weekly chart in my opinion. I don't know if anybody remembers, we kind of caught this move up into the weekly breakout attempt up here. And it has come back down to kind of retrace this, and it's holding this like long-term weekly uptrend here. But if you go down to the daily, I think it's a little bit more of a setup there. So I'm really watching this. Earnings are out of the way, and then we are just kind of flagging here as the moving averages catch up. I don't see why this can't go back up to the top of this range at a minimum, back to this 120 spot. It's just a matter of buying enough time. Their next earnings aren't until October there. But this is probably, just because no one's paying attention to it, if it does start to catch wind like HPQ, I think this one can really run. So LOGI, definitely one of my favorite names coming in this week. On Thursday, they hit the March 105 calls, which this rarely sees flow. So far, they're a few bucks up on that, right? They came in around 103 half, and this closed up in the 106s. So far, they're right. Again, I think this has a lot of room. If it gets going, the weekly's a little sloppy, but you got a 3-1 setup here on the weekly. So could see some big expansion back through last week's high, 109.42, but 3-1 possible 2 up setup on this, and I think this could really get going. You can see back here, once it catches some momentum, it can be a decent mover. 10 points a week isn't anything to shake a stick at. That was almost 15. So LOGI, sleeper play, not talked about very much. I think this could be a really good hardware play. With that being said, I'll kind of wrap up here into the little over 30-minute mark. Kind of gets all my thoughts out there. For the most part, we'll update anything else that I come into. Obviously, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of things potentially setting up. What I noticed this week, there was a lot of 2 down, 2 up reversals on the weekly, including like some of the nuclear names. OKLO back up here, trying to get over that. Weekly 8 EMA, CCJ, we've talked about this one out of this mid 80s area, big bounce out of it so far. So we're starting to see, some things kind of pick back up. I mentioned Boeing. We saw, the drone stuff pick back up, but LEU, really big setup here for the nuclear sector, in my opinion, with CCJ, and then BWXT, also a 3-1 setup here at a big support area. So this has been, consolidating for quite a while. It's kind of peaked out of the bottom of that range now. It peaked out of the top. But this is one of the more legitimate nuclear names. So just kind of putting stuff on your radar as far as sectors I'm seeing for potential reversals. AVAV is definitely up there with the drone theme. KTOS is coming out of a big area. So there's a lot of stuff starting to shape back up, and that's kind of what you want to see if the market's going to be breaking out, is you want to have a plethora of themes and sectors like starting to break out and catch fire and start to perform. So, major downtrend break here on KTOS. Hasn't been above that weekly 8 EMA in quite a long time, since March, and a big change in character for it. So what we want to see here, do we get consolidations, setups, like an inside week? Are there dips on the daily that we can like buy within this retracement zone? So that's what the weekly chart scans are for, is to kind of put, you know, the big weekly picture on tap and then go down to a daily and see if we find anything actionable within that, right? So earnings out of the way, that's good. You know, nice two, and then inside day here. So this is definitely setting up here right into this 200 day. So I will cap it there. Hopefully that helps. Again, longer winded than I wanted to be. I was hoping this would be 15-20 minutes, but I think it's impossible to cover everything in that amount of time. So as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Happy to kind of dive into things deeper for you. But this is what kind of popped up on my scan. Again, to reiterate, uh, individual name setups. I do like Boeing, like some of the drone names, CBRS into earnings and after earnings, the hardware space, Logitech, HPQ, and then potentially some of those rate sensitive names in the solar and home builder sector. So hope you all have a great rest of your Sunday. I will see y'all soon. Peace.